Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. Welcome back to Horror Night Whispers. Tonight, we return to the ancient forests of the Pacific Northwest, where the pines grow so tall they swallow the sky, and the silence between the trees carries weight you can feel pressing against your chest. These mountains have watched over this land for millennia, and the wilderness here does not forget. The story you are about to hear has been reconstructed from ranger field notes, thermal imaging logs, and internal transfer documents that were never meant to surface. Some files were classified under designations that do not appear in any federal database. We obtained them anyway. What follows is not folklore. It is not legend. It is a documented encounter that the United States Forest Service has never acknowledged. If this story unsettles you, consider subscribing. There are darker things waiting in these archives. Now, let us begin. The Cascade Range in early spring carries a particular kind of cold, not the biting freeze of deep winter, but something damp and patient. A chill that seeps through Gore-Tex and settles into the marrow. Thomas Vance had spent 12 years learning the moods of these mountains, reading the weather in the way the Douglas firs swayed, predicting rainfall by the behavior of the Roosevelt elk that grazed the lower meadows. He was not a man prone to anxiety. He had survived 3 separate encounters with black bears, had once spent 9 days alone in the backcountry after a bridge washout cut him off from extraction, and had pulled the bodies of 2 lost hikers from a ravine in the winter of 2014. The wilderness did not frighten him. He understood it. Or he believed he did. In April of 2019, Thomas received his seasonal assignment to Station 12 North, a decommissioned fire lookout that had been converted into a ranger outpost in the early 1992. The station sat at the end of an unmaintained fire road, accessible only by 4-wheel drive when conditions allowed, and completely cut off during the spring thaw when the access route became a river of mud and debris. His duties were routine trail surveys, wildlife monitoring, maintenance checks on the old fire road markers that stretched deeper into the wilderness. He had worked remote postings before. He preferred them. The solitude suited him. The first 3 weeks passed without incident. Thomas documented the expected signs of spring, the return of migratory birds, the emergence of black bear from their winter dens, the slow greening of the understory as the snowpack retreated up the mountainsides. His field notes from this period are methodical, precise, the observations of a man who took his work seriously. He recorded temperature fluctuations, precipitation levels, and the general health of the trail system under his jurisdiction. There is nothing in these early entries to suggest anything unusual. The first anomaly appears in his notes on April 19th. Thomas had been conducting a routine survey of the fire road, checking the condition of the mile markers that stretched from Station 12 North deeper into the backcountry. At mile marker 47, approximately 6 miles from his cabin, he noted what he described as a sudden atmospheric shift. The bird calls, which had been constant throughout his hike, ceased entirely. The wind, which had been carrying the scent of pine and wet earth, died. Thomas wrote that he experienced a pressure against his eardrums, similar to the sensation of descending in an unpressurized aircraft, a tightening, a compression, as though the air itself had grown dense. He stood at the marker for several minutes, waiting for the sensation to pass. It did not. He turned back toward the station, and the moment he crossed some invisible threshold, the forest resumed its normal rhythms. The birds returned, the wind picked up, the pressure released. Thomas attributed the experience to a weather anomaly, perhaps a localized pressure system settling into the valley. He made a note to check the barometric readings when he returned to the station. The readings showed nothing unusual. Over the following nights, Thomas began to hear footsteps outside his cabin. The first occurrence was on April 21st, shortly after midnight. He was lying in his bunk, not yet asleep, when he heard the unmistakable crunch of boots on the gravel that surrounded the station. The footsteps moved in a slow, deliberate circle around the cabin's perimeter, not the erratic movements of an animal investigating a scent, but a measured, rhythmic pacing. Thomas rose from his bunk and checked the windows. The moon was bright enough to illuminate the clearing, but he saw nothing. The footsteps continued for approximately 45 minutes before stopping abruptly. Thomas did not sleep that night. The pattern repeated on April 22nd, 23rd, and 24th. Each night, the footsteps began at the same time, 12:07 a.m. according to Thomas's notes, and circled the cabin in the same precise rhythm. Thomas set up motion-activated cameras around the perimeter. The cameras captured nothing. He laid flour across the gravel to track impressions. In the morning, the flour was undisturbed, but he had heard the footsteps. He had counted them. 63 steps per circuit, always 63. On the night of April 25th, Thomas retrieved the thermal imaging equipment that was stored at the station for wildlife surveys. He positioned himself at the rear window, the one facing the tree line, and waited. At 12:07 a.m., the footsteps began. Thomas raised the thermal scope and scanned the perimeter. What he saw would later be described in his incident report as a humanoid figure standing motionless between two Douglas firs, approximately 40 yards from his position. The thermal signature was faint, cooler than a living human body should register, but distinctly present against the ambient temperature of the forest. The figure did not move. It simply stood there, facing the cabin, its outline rendered in the blue-green spectrum of the thermal display. Thomas watched it for 6 hours. In his notes, he attempted to describe the figure's proportions with the clinical detachment of a trained observer, but his handwriting became increasingly erratic as the entry progressed. He wrote that the limbs were wrong, too long for the torso, the arms hanging past where the knees should have been. The head was tilted at an angle that suggested severe cervical trauma, as though the neck had been broken and never reset. The figure did not sway. It did not shift its weight. It stood with the absolute stillness of something that did not need to breathe. At 6:23 a.m., the first gray light of dawn began to filter through the canopy. Thomas blinked, his eyes burning from hours of unbroken focus on the thermal display. When he looked again, the figure was gone. The space between the Douglas firs was empty. The thermal scope showed nothing but the ambient signature of the forest. Thomas did not leave the cabin that day. He sat at the small desk near the radio equipment, writing and rewriting his observations, trying to frame what he had witnessed in language that would not sound insane. He was a rational man. He believed in evidence, in documentation, in the explanatory power of careful observation. But the evidence he had gathered defied rational interpretation. It was late afternoon when he noticed the marks beneath the rear window. Thomas stepped outside, moving slowly, his hand resting on the bear spray canister at his belt, a gesture that felt absurd even as he made it. The ground beneath the rear window was soft from the spring thaw, and pressed into the mud were a series of barefoot impressions. They led from the tree line directly to the cabin wall, stopping just beneath the window frame. The impressions were elongated, the toes stretched to unnatural lengths, the arch of the foot too high, too narrow. They were not human prints. They were something that had tried to approximate human prints and failed. The window glass was smeared with a dark residue, a substance that had the consistency of old sap but carried a faint metallic odor. Thomas collected a sample using the field kit stored at the station. He documented the impressions with his camera. He measured the distance between each print, 47 inches, a stride length that exceeded what any normal human could achieve without running. The prints suggested the figure had walked slowly, deliberately, from the trees to the window, and then stopped. Thomas spent the next 2 hours on the radio, attempting to reach regional command. The signal was weak, cutting in and out, but he managed to transmit his request for immediate transfer and a formal incident report. The response came the following morning. His transfer was approved, and a retrieval team would arrive within 72 hours to collect him and the thermal imaging equipment. He did not sleep during those 72 hours. He sat with his back to the interior wall, facing the door, the thermal scope in his hands. The footsteps came each night at 12:07 a.m., circling the cabin in their precise, measured rhythm. But Thomas did not look through the scope again. He did not want to see what was out there. He did not want to know if it had moved closer. When the retrieval team arrived, Thomas submitted his formal complaint. He wrote that something in the sector surrounding mile marker 47 was waiting for permission to enter. He did not elaborate on what he meant by this. The phrase appeared in his notes 3 times, underlined twice. The retrieval team confiscated his thermal footage, his field notes, and the sample he had collected from the window. He was told the materials would be processed through standard channels. He was told someone would follow up. No one followed up. Thomas Vance was reassigned to an administrative position in the regional office. He never returned to field work. Station 12 North was decommissioned 6 weeks after his extraction. The official reason listed as structural concerns following the spring thaw. The fire road to mile marker 47 was removed from all published trail maps. In the years since, there have been 3 additional incidents reported in the sector: hikers who emerged from the backcountry with stories of pressure changes, of footsteps in the night, of a figure standing at the edge of their campsites in the pre-dawn hours. None of these reports were officially logged. The witnesses were interviewed, their statements recorded, and then the files were sealed under a classification protocol that does not appear in any federal database. Thomas Vance retired from the Forest Service in 2022. He has not spoken publicly about his experience at Station 12 North, but those who knew him in the years after describe a man who never quite recovered, a man who checked the locks on his doors 3 times before bed, and who could not sleep without a light burning in every room. The thermal footage he captured on the night of April 25, 2019, has never been released. Regional Command maintains that no such footage exists, but the file classification under which it was sealed, a designation that appears nowhere in official records, suggests otherwise. Something is waiting in the Cascade Range, in the sector surrounding mile marker 47. It has been waiting for a very long time, and according to the ranger's final report, it is still waiting for permission to enter. We do not know what would happen if that permission were granted. Perhaps it is better that we never find out. Now we will begin our second story. The southern corridor of the Appalachian Trail cuts through some of the oldest mountains on Earth. These ridges have been worn down by 400 million years of wind and rain, their peaks softened into gentle waves that roll toward the horizon like the spine of some sleeping creature. In the spring of 1997, this section of trail was maintained by a rotating crew of rangers who knew every blaze, every shelter, every water source within their jurisdiction. They knew which campsites flooded in heavy rain. They knew which creek crossings became impassable after snowmelt. They knew the names of the regular thru-hikers who passed through each season, faces weathered by weeks of sun and exertion, boots held together with duct tape and determination. What they did not know, what none of them could have prepared for, was what waited in the ridgeline shelter that had been sealed and abandoned 13 years earlier. The incident began with a missed check-in. 2 thru-hikers, a married couple from Vermont in their late 30s, had been making steady progress southbound since late March. They maintained contact with ranger stations along the route, a standard precaution for experienced hikers traveling through remote sections. On April 14th, they failed to appear at the Sawmill Creek waypoint. The ranger on duty waited until the following morning before initiating a search. Weather conditions had been clear, temperatures mild for the elevation. There was no obvious reason for delay. The search team consisted of 3 rangers and a volunteer from the local fire department. They set out at dawn, following the trail northward from Sawmill Creek toward the last confirmed sighting of the couple at a resupply point 11 miles back. The forest that morning was quiet, in a way that one ranger would later describe in his personal notes as wrong, not peaceful, not still. Wrong. The usual chorus of birdsong that accompanied spring mornings at this elevation was absent. The wind moved through the canopy without sound, as though the air itself had thickened into something that absorbed noise rather than carried it. They found the tent shortly after noon, pitched in a small clearing approximately 200 yards from a structure that should not have been accessible. The ridgeline shelter had been officially closed in 1984 following a partial roof collapse. The Forest Service had removed it from all trail maps and blocked the access path with fallen timber and warning signs. Yet here was the tent, its orange fabric visible through the trees, oriented directly toward the shelter, as though the occupants had wanted to keep it in sight. The tent was empty. Sleeping bags lay unzipped and bunched against the far wall. A small camp stove sat cold beside two metal cups still containing coffee that had long since evaporated into dark residue. The couple's packs remained inside, fully loaded, food supplies untouched. Their boots stood paired neatly at the entrance. Whatever had drawn them from the tent had drawn them barefoot. The journals were discovered in a side pocket of the larger pack. Two spiral-bound notebooks, their pages filled with the kind of detailed observations common among serious hikers: mileage logs, weather notes, sketches of wildflowers and birds. The entries maintained this ordinary character until April 12th, 2 days before the missed check-in. The handwriting in both journals changed on that date. Letters grew larger, more erratic, sentences fragmented. The husband's notebook contained a single phrase repeated across 6 consecutive pages. "She keeps asking for help, but her mouth doesn't move." The wife's journal was more detailed, but no less disturbing. She described waking on the night of the 11th to the sound of a woman's voice calling from the direction of the closed shelter. The voice was clear, articulate, speaking in complete sentences. It said that it was hurt. It said that it needed assistance. It said please, over and over, in a rhythm that the wife noted seemed mechanical, as though the words were being produced by something that understood their meaning only in the most superficial sense. She timed the repetitions. 90 seconds between each cycle. Exactly 90 seconds. She wrote that she had pressed her hands over her ears but could still hear it, not through her skull but inside it, as though the voice had found a way past the barrier of bone and flesh. The most troubling entry came from the 12th. The husband had apparently approached the shelter alone while his wife remained in the tent. He returned, according to her account, pale and shaking, refusing to speak about what he had seen. That night, they made a recording. The couple owned a handheld audio device, a small recorder used for capturing bird calls and natural soundscapes. They positioned it at the edge of their campsite, facing the shelter, and let it run for 3 hours. The search team found the recorder beneath the husband's sleeping bag. One of the rangers, a woman with 17 years of experience in the region, pressed play. The recording began with ambient forest sounds, wind, distant water, the occasional rustle of leaves. Then, at the 47-minute mark, the audio quality shifted. A low, rhythmic sound emerged beneath the background noise, a pattern that rose and fell with the regularity of breathing, but at a frequency too slow for human lungs. The intervals between inhalations stretched to nearly 20 seconds each. The exhalations lasted longer still. And beneath this breathing, barely audible, was something that might have been a voice, or might have been static shaped by coincidence into something that resembled words. The ranger stopped the playback. She did not press play again. The team approached the ridgeline shelter with the kind of caution usually reserved for structural hazards and wildlife encounters. The building itself was a standard 3-sided Appalachian Trail design, open at the front, with a raised wooden sleeping platform and a sloped roof. Or, it had been. What remained was a structure that seemed to have aged far beyond its 30 years, its timbers blackened and warped, its roof sagging inward like the ribcage of something long dead. The warning signs posted by the Forest Service in 1984 lay scattered in the underbrush, their wood split and rotted, their painted letters illegible. The door was the first visible anomaly. Shelters of this design did not have doors. The open front was an intentional feature, allowing hikers to enjoy the view while remaining protected from rain. Yet this shelter had a door, or had once had one. It lay 15 feet from the entrance, torn from hinges that had been mounted on the interior side of the frame. The wood around the hinges was splintered outward, as though something inside had forced its way through with tremendous pressure. The volunteer from the fire department noted that the damage pattern was inconsistent with wind or animal activity. Whatever had removed this door had done so from within, pushing outward with enough force to tear the mounting hardware through solid oak. The interior of the shelter was dark, despite the midday sun. The shadows within seemed to possess a density that resisted illumination, swallowing the beam of the lead ranger's flashlight after only a few feet. The sleeping platform had collapsed into a heap of rotted timber. The back wall was covered in a substance that might have been moss or mold, but reflected the light with an oily sheen that suggested neither. And on the dirt floor, visible even in the inadequate light, were drag marks. 2 parallel grooves in the packed earth, each approximately the width of a human heel, leading from the entrance toward the back right corner of the structure. The team followed the marks. They terminated at a section of floor where several boards had been pried up and cast aside. The wood was damp, spongy with rot, and marked with deep gouges that resembled fingernail scratches. Beneath the removed boards was darkness, a void that should not have existed. The shelter's foundation was a simple platform design, raised only inches above the ground. There should have been nothing beneath it but packed earth and stone. Instead, the flashlight revealed a vertical shaft descending into blackness, its walls composed of raw dirt held in place by roots and rock, its depth indeterminate. The youngest ranger, a man of 26 who had been with the service for only 3 years, volunteered to descend. He secured a rope around his waist while his colleagues anchored the other end to a nearby tree. He lowered himself into the shaft, feet first, flashlight clenched between his teeth, and began his descent. The walls of the shaft were wet. Moisture seeped from the earth in thin rivulets that soaked through his uniform and chilled his skin. The smell that rose from below was not decay, not the expected odor of decomposition or stagnant water. It was older than that. It was the smell of air that had been sealed away from the world for a very long time, air that had never known sunlight or wind, that had been breathed and rebreathed by something that had no need for freshness. The ranger descended 10 feet, then 12, then 15. His flashlight beam finally found something other than dirt and root. There was a figure crouched at the bottom of the shaft. It was pale, so pale that it seemed to generate its own faint luminescence in the absolute darkness, its skin possessing the translucent quality of something that had never been exposed to daylight. It was shaped like a woman, or had been shaped like a woman, its proportions elongated and wrong, its limbs folded at angles that suggested joints in places where joints should not exist. It was facing away from him, its head bowed toward the earthen wall, its shoulders rising and falling with that same slow, impossible rhythm he had heard on the recording. And then, as though it sensed his presence, it turned. The face that emerged from the darkness was a void-given form. The eyes were present, but empty. Dark holes that reflected nothing, that seemed to pull the light from his flashlight into themselves and extinguish it. The mouth was open, stretched wide in what might have been a scream or might have been something else entirely, but no sound emerged. The jaw continued to move, working up and down in the mechanical rhythm of speech, shaping words that produced no vibration, no noise, nothing but the faint, wet click of a tongue against teeth that were too numerous and too sharp. The ranger was pulled from the shaft by his colleagues. He did not speak for the remainder of the search. He did not speak during the hike back to the ranger station. He submitted his written report the following day and tendered his resignation the day after that. In his final interview with his supervisor, he said only one thing about what he had witnessed. It was waiting for them. It had always been waiting. The Ridgeline shelter was destroyed by controlled burn on April 21st, 1997. The official justification cited hazardous materials, a designation that required no further explanation and precluded any investigation. The burn team reported that the structure caught fire immediately, as though the wood had been soaked in accelerant, and that it burned with a heat far exceeding what the available fuel should have produced. One member of the burn team, in an unofficial account given years later, claimed that he heard something screaming from within the flames, a sound that rose in pitch and volume until it exceeded the range of human hearing, until it became a pressure in his skull rather than a noise in his ears. The 2 hikers from Vermont were never found. Their families received the standard notification, the standard condolences, the standard assurances that everything possible had been done. Search dogs brought to the site refused to approach the burn scar where the shelter had stood. Aerial surveys revealed nothing. Ground searches extending 5 miles in every direction produced no trace of human remains, no clothing, no equipment, nothing to suggest that 2 people had ever existed in that place. The incident report filed by the search team was rejected 3 times before a revised version was accepted into the official record. The original report, with its references to the recording, the shaft, the figure in the darkness, was sealed and transferred to an archive in Washington that does not appear in any public database. 3 rangers refused to sign the final document. One of them, in a letter to his brother discovered after his death in 2014, wrote that some things should not be recorded because recording them gives them power. He wrote that the voice on that tape was still calling, somewhere, in a loop that would continue until someone else answered. He wrote that he sometimes woke in the night and heard it, faint and distant, coming from a direction that did not exist on any compass. The Southern Appalachian Trail corridor remains open to hikers. The section where the ridgeline shelter once stood is now marked only by a small clearing where nothing grows, where the soil remains black and powdery 17 years after the burn. Rangers who patrol the area report nothing unusual. The forest has reclaimed its silence. The birds have returned. But those who camp nearby, those who pitch their tents within earshot of that empty clearing, sometimes report hearing something in the deepest hours of the night. A woman's voice, they say, calling for help every 90 seconds. Exactly every 90 seconds. Now, we will begin our third story. Dead Horse Basin sits in a forgotten crease of the northern Rockies, a place where the mountains fold inward and the sky seems to press down with unusual weight. The basin earned its name in the late 1800s when a surveying expedition lost 7 horses to an unexplained panic that sent the animals charging into a ravine. The surveyor's journal, recovered years later, noted only that the horses had been looking at something in the trees before they bolted. Since then, the basin has accumulated a quiet history of strange occurrences. Hunters who refuse to return, hikers who emerge from its boundaries pale and silent, search parties that find their compasses spinning uselessly. The Forest Service has always maintained that the area's magnetic anomalies account for the disorientation. They have never explained the other things. In August of 2011, a routine aerial survey detected heat signatures in the basin's restricted burn zone. The region had been closed to the public for 3 years, following a devastating wildfire that had scorched over 12,000 acres. The Forest Service had implemented strict no-access protocols, and the detection of what appeared to be illegal campfires prompted immediate action. Ranger Station 14 dispatched a 2-man patrol unit at approximately 6:30 in the evening, with instructions to investigate the source of the fires and document any trespassing activity. The Rangers were Michael Vance, a 12-year veteran of the service, and Daniel Cowell, who had transferred from the Pacific Northwest District 8 months prior. Both men were experienced in backcountry enforcement and had conducted dozens of similar patrols without incident. The evening was unremarkable as they departed. The August heat had begun to relent, and a thin layer of clouds stretched across the horizon, filtering the sunset into muted bands of orange and gray. Vance drove the patrol vehicle along the fire road that skirted the basin's western edge, while Cowell monitored the radio and logged their position at regular intervals. Their last transmission came at 8:14 in the evening, a routine check-in confirming their approach to the basin's northern access point. Cowell's voice on the recording was calm, professional, noting that they expected to reach the suspected campfire location within 40 minutes. The radio went silent after that. Repeated attempts to raise the patrol unit over the following 2 hours received no response. The recovery team was dispatched at first light. They found the patrol vehicle, exactly where the GPS tracker indicated it should be, parked at the edge of a narrow clearing where the fire road terminated against a wall of regenerating pine. The engine was still running, the fuel gauge showing a quarter tank. Both doors stood open, and the headlights carved pale tunnels through the morning fog that had settled over the basin like a burial shroud. The keys remained in the ignition. The radio handset dangled from its cord, swaying slightly in the breeze that crept through the open doors. There was no sign of the Rangers. What the recovery team noticed first was the silence. The basin should have been alive with the sounds of morning birds calling, insects buzzing, the rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Instead, there was nothing. One member of the team later described it as standing inside a vacuum, as though the forest itself was holding its breath. They found the rangers' trail leading deeper into the wilderness, their boot prints pressed into the soft earth with unusual depth, as though both men had been walking with tremendous effort. The trail wound through dense stands of fire-scarred trees, past rock formations that jutted from the ground like broken teeth, and finally arrived at a massive boulder that sat alone in a small clearing approximately 3 miles from the vehicle. Michael Vance and Daniel Cowell were seated on the ground, with their backs pressed against the boulder, facing opposite directions. Their eyes were open, their breathing shallow but steady. Neither man responded to his name. Neither man responded to physical contact. They sat perfectly still, their hands gripping each other's wrists behind the boulder, their fingers interlocked with such force that the recovery team had difficulty separating them. When they were finally pulled apart, both men continued to stare straight ahead, their expressions blank, their pupils dilated to an unusual degree despite the morning light. They were transported to the regional medical center in complete silence. For 11 days, neither ranger spoke a word. Medical examinations revealed no physical trauma, no evidence of exposure to toxins or hallucinogens, no neurological abnormalities that could explain their catatonic state. They ate when food was placed before them. They slept when the lights were dimmed. They followed basic instructions: stand, sit, walk, but they initiated nothing on their own. Psychiatrists noted that both men exhibited signs of extreme psychological trauma, but the source of that trauma remained unknown. Hospital staff reported that the rangers would sometimes turn their heads in unison, as though tracking something moving through the room that no one else could see. On the 12th day, Michael Vance began to speak. He spoke in a low, flat monotone, his words emerging slowly, as though each syllable required tremendous effort to produce. He did not look at the interviewer. He stared at the wall behind her, his eyes fixed on a point that seemed to exist somewhere beyond the physical surface. He described the patrol in clinical terms. At first, the drive to the basin, the approach to the suspected campfire location. The moment they stepped out of the vehicle and began their sweep on foot, he described the silence that had descended over the forest as they walked. The way the beam of his flashlight seemed to stop short, as though the darkness itself was pushing back against the light. Then he described the figure. It had emerged from the tree line approximately 200 yards ahead of their position. Vance said he noticed it first as a vertical interruption in the darkness, a shape that did not belong among the trees. He raised his flashlight, and the beam illuminated something that his mind initially refused to process. It was tall, he estimated 8 feet, perhaps more, and impossibly thin, its limbs elongated to proportions that suggested starvation taken to a terminal extreme. It stood motionless at first, and Vance convinced himself for a fleeting moment that it was a dead tree, a fire-scarred trunk that had somehow remained standing. Then it moved. The movement was wrong. Vance struggled to articulate this, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper, as he described the way the figure's joints seemed to bend in directions that human anatomy did not permit. Its knees flexed backward, its elbows rotated in full circles. Its neck tilted at an angle that should have been fatal, the head lolling to one side, before snapping upright with a motion that was sudden and violent. It moved toward them with a stuttering, disjointed gait, covering ground in lurching steps that seemed to skip frames, as though reality itself was having difficulty rendering its presence. Cowell had grabbed Vance's arm by then, his grip so tight that it left bruises that were still visible when the recovery team found them. The figure stopped at the edge of their flashlight beams. It stood in that threshold between light and darkness, and Vance saw its face for the first time. He said it had no face. Where features should have been, there was only a smooth expanse of gray skin stretched taut over a skull-shaped mass. No eyes, no mouth, no indication of sensory organs of any kind. The skin had a texture like old leather, cracked and weathered, and it seemed to absorb the light rather than reflect it. Vance said looking at it was like staring into a void that had learned to stand upright. Then it raised its arm. The limb extended slowly, the joints popping and cracking with sounds that carried clearly through the silent forest. Its fingers were too long, each digit possessing an additional joint that allowed them to curl in ways that made Vance's stomach turn. It raised its arm until it pointed directly at the sky, its elongated finger aimed at the stars that had begun to emerge through the thinning clouds. And then Vance felt it. He described it as a pull, a compulsion that originated somewhere behind his eyes and spread through his body like ice water flooding his veins. He wanted to follow it. He needed to follow it. The desire was overwhelming, absolute, a certainty that walking into those trees and following that figure wherever it led was the only thing that mattered. The only thing that had ever mattered. Cowell felt it too. Vance saw his partner take a step forward, his flashlight dropping from his hand, his eyes fixed on the figure with an expression of terrible longing. Vance grabbed him. He wrapped his arms around Cowell's chest and pulled him backward, and Cowell screamed a sound of pure anguish, as though Vance was tearing him away from something precious. They fought each other. They restrained each other. They held on with everything they had as the compulsion clawed at their minds, as the figure stood motionless at the edge of the light, with its arm raised toward the empty sky. They retreated to the boulder. They sat with their backs pressed against the cold stone, facing opposite directions so they could watch the tree line from both sides. They gripped each other's wrists behind the rock, creating a physical anchor that neither could break without the other's cooperation. And they waited. The figure did not approach. It did not pursue. It simply stood there, pointing at the sky, a patient silhouette against the darkness. Vance said he could feel its attention on them, a weight that pressed against his thoughts, a whisper that urged him to stand, to walk, to follow. He resisted. They both resisted. They held on until the first gray light of dawn crept over the mountains and the figure was gone. Vance could not explain where it went. One moment it was there. The next moment, the tree line was empty. He could not explain why they had remained in their position against the boulder rather than returning to the vehicle. He could not explain the 11 days of silence. He said only that he had been afraid to speak, afraid that opening his mouth would somehow invite the compulsion back, would give voice to the thing that still whispered at the edges of his consciousness. Daniel Cowell never confirmed this account. He never denied it either. He simply refused to speak about the incident at all, responding to questions with a blank stare that suggested he was looking at something far beyond the walls of whatever room he occupied. He was discharged from the Forest Service on medical grounds 6 weeks after the incident. He was subsequently admitted to a psychiatric facility in Montana, where he remains to this day. Hospital staff report that he is a model patient, quiet, cooperative, causes no disturbances. They also report that every night, without fail, he produces a small piece of charcoal that he has hidden somewhere in his room and draws the same figure on his wall. A tall, impossibly thin shape with no face and one arm raised toward the ceiling. Dead Horse Basin remains closed to public access. The Forest Service has cited ongoing fire recovery and environmental concerns as the official reason for the closure. They have never issued an explanation for the incident involving rangers, Vance, and Cowell. The heat signatures that prompted the original patrol were never investigated. No campfires were ever found. In the years since, there have been other reports from the areas surrounding the basin. Hunters who glimpse something tall and gray moving between the trees at dusk. Hikers who feel an inexplicable urge to leave the trail and walk into the forest. Search and rescue teams who find lost persons seated against rocks or trees, unresponsive, their eyes fixed on the sky. The stories are always dismissed. The reports are always filed away. The basin keeps its secrets, and the figure that walks its tree line continues to raise its arm toward the stars, pointing at something in the vast darkness above that no human eye has ever been able to see. Michael Vance retired from the Forest Service in 2013. He lives alone in a small cabin in Wyoming, far from the mountains. He has never returned to the Northern Rockies. He has never explained why he keeps every light in his cabin burning through the night, or why he has nailed his windows shut, or why he sometimes sits for hours staring at the tree line beyond his property with an expression that suggests he is waiting for something to emerge from the shadows. Some compulsions, it seems, never fully release their grip. Now we will begin our fourth story. The Olympic National Forest spans nearly 1 million acres of temperate rainforest, alpine meadows, and glacier-carved valleys across Washington's Olympic Peninsula. It is one of the wettest places in the continental United States, receiving over 12 feet of rainfall annually in some areas, and its interior remains among the least accessible wilderness regions in the Pacific Northwest. The forest is old. The trees here have stood for centuries, their trunks wrapped in thick carpets of moss, their canopies so dense that sunlight rarely touches the forest floor. In winter, the already dim light fades to near perpetual twilight, and the silence becomes something almost physical, a weight that presses against the ears and settles into the chest. It is a landscape that swallows sound, swallows light, swallows people. And in January of 2003, it swallowed a ranger named Catherine Vance. The internal file, designated Cabin 9 Incident, was sealed by the National Park Service shortly after the recovery operation concluded. It remains classified under a wildlife research exemption that does not correspond to any known study, past or present. Freedom of information requests have been denied. Personnel involved in the initial response have declined to comment. The cabin itself no longer exists. What remains is a series of radio transmissions, a 17-minute audio recording, and a set of unanswered questions that have never been publicly addressed. Catherine Vance was 34 years old when she was assigned to the winter survey rotation at Cabin 9. She had been with the Park Service for 11 years and had requested remote postings exclusively for the last 4. Colleagues described her as competent, reserved, and comfortable with isolation in ways that made others uneasy. She had spent previous winters at outposts in the North Cascades and the Passaten Wilderness without incident. Cabin 9 was supposed to be routine. The outpost sat at the end of a decommissioned logging road, 7 miles from the nearest maintained trail and accessible only by foot or snowmobile during winter months. It was a single-room structure with a wood stove, a cot, a small table, and a radio unit connected to the ranger station at Sol Duc. Catherine arrived on January 10th and checked in at 1600 hours to confirm her position. Her voice on that first transmission was calm, professional, unremarkable. She reported clear skies, moderate snowpack, and no signs of unusual wildlife activity. She planned to begin her survey transects the following morning. For the next 3 days, her check-ins followed the standard protocol, brief, factual, and spaced at 12-hour intervals. She noted elk tracks along the river drainage, evidence of recent cougar activity near the ridgeline, and the persistent fog that rolled through the valley each evening, reducing visibility to less than 20 feet. On the morning of January 13th, she mentioned that she had not slept well. She attributed it to the wind, which had picked up overnight and created strange acoustics around the cabin. She described hearing what sounded like scratching beneath the floorboards, intermittent and arrhythmic, as if something were dragging itself through the crawl space under the structure. She assumed it was a rodent or a raccoon seeking shelter from the cold. She did not sound concerned. By that evening, her tone had changed. The scratching had continued throughout the day, she reported, even when she stomped on the floor or banged on the walls. It would stop for a few minutes, then resume in a different location, moving from one end of the cabin to the other in a pattern that seemed almost deliberate. She had gone outside to inspect the foundation and found nothing, no tracks in the snow, no gaps in the skirting, no evidence of any animal presence. The snow around the cabin was undisturbed. She noted this detail twice, as if she did not quite believe it herself. That night, she reported a new development. The smell had started. It came through the walls in waves, thick and organic, like rotting meat left in standing water. She checked the wood stove, checked the food stores, checked every corner of the cabin for a source. There was nothing. The smell would intensify for several minutes, then fade, then return stronger than before. She described the sensation of pressure building in her sinuses, a heaviness behind her eyes that made it difficult to focus. She did not sleep that night. She sat with her back to the wall, watching the single window that faced the tree line, and she waited for morning. On the morning of January 14th, her check-in was delayed by 2 hours. When she finally made contact, her voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. She reported that the scratching had stopped sometime before dawn. In its place, there was a new sound, a low, wet shifting beneath the floorboards, like something large repositioning itself in the dirt. She said she could feel it through the soles of her boots, a subtle vibration that traveled up through the wood and into her bones. The smell was worse now, so strong that she had tied a cloth over her nose and mouth just to breathe. But the thing that had broken her, the thing that had stripped the professional detachment from her voice and left her speaking in fragments, was the voice. It had started at 0300 hours. A woman's voice, coming from directly beneath the cabin, speaking her name, not calling, not shouting, speaking it softly, over and over, in a tone of patient invitation. The voice belonged to her mother. Her mother, who had died of pancreatic cancer in a hospice in Tacoma 26 months earlier. Her mother, whose funeral she had attended, whose ashes she had scattered in the Hoh rainforest because that was what her mother had wanted. Catherine knew it was not her mother. She knew that whatever was beneath the cabin was not human, was not alive in any way she understood. But the voice was perfect. The cadence, the slight rasp from decades of smoking, the way it softened on the second syllable of her name. It was her mother, and it was asking her to come down. Catherine armed herself with her service weapon and a hunting knife she kept in her pack. She pushed the cot against the door and sat facing it, her back to the window, her radio within arm's reach. She did not respond to the voice. She did not open the door. She maintained contact with the Sol Duke station at irregular intervals throughout the day, providing updates in a voice that grew progressively flatter, progressively more detached. The dispatcher on duty noted in his log that Ranger Vance sounded dissociated and possibly in shock. He requested permission to dispatch a welfare check, but weather conditions had deteriorated and the access road was impassable. A ground team would be sent at first light. At 2,200 hours, Catherine reported that the voice had changed. It was still her mother's voice, still speaking her name. But now there were other sounds, layered beneath it, wet, guttural sounds that did not match any vocalization she had ever heard. She described it as if something were trying to speak through a throat full of mud, shaping words it did not understand around a tongue that was not designed for human language. She said the floorboards were beginning to bow inward at the center of the cabin, as if something beneath them were pressing upward. She said she could hear breathing now, slow and labored, synchronized with the shifting beneath the floor. She said she was not going to make it until morning. Her final transmission came at 0347 hours on January 15th. It lasted 11 seconds. Her voice was calm, almost serene, in a way that disturbed the dispatcher more than anything that had come before. She said, "It's inside now. It came up through the floor. I can see it. I can see her face." "It's not her face." The transmission ended. The radio remained active, broadcasting ambient audio for the next 17 minutes before the signal cut out. That recording was analyzed by 3 separate forensic audio teams in the months that followed. The official report described the sounds as inconclusive and attributed them to environmental interference and possible equipment malfunction. Unofficial analysis, conducted by a retired FBI audio specialist who reviewed the recording at the request of Catherine's family, reached a different conclusion. The recording contains 3 distinct sound categories. The first is ambient noise wind, the creak of the cabin structure, the pop of cooling wood. The second is what the specialist described as wet movement, a continuous, rhythmic sound consistent with something large dragging itself across a surface. The third is a vocalization that occurs at the 14-minute mark and lasts for approximately 8 seconds. It is not wind. It is not animal. It does not match any known human language or dialect. The specialist described it as linguistically structured, but phonetically impossible, containing sounds that would require vocal apparatus fundamentally different from human anatomy to produce. The recording ends with a sharp crack, possibly the radio being struck or dropped, followed by silence. The recovery team reached Cabin 9 at 0930 hours on January 15th. The weather had cleared overnight, and they made good time on snowmobiles up the logging road. They found the cabin intact. The door was closed but not locked. The cot had been moved back to its original position. The wood stove was cold. There was no sign of struggle, no blood, no indication of violence. Catherine Vance was gone. Her service weapon was found on the table, unfired. Her knife was in its sheath, still attached to her pack. Her coat hung on the hook by the door. Her boots were arranged neatly on the front step, toes pointing outward, as if she had removed them before stepping outside. The team searched the immediate area and found no tracks leading away from the cabin in any direction. The snow was pristine, unmarked except for their own approach. It was as if Catherine had simply ceased to exist. Then, one of the team members noticed the hole. It was beneath the cabin, accessible through a gap in the foundation skirting that had not been there during Catherine's initial inspection. The hole descended into the earth at an angle of approximately 60 degrees, far steeper than any known burrowing animal could achieve. The walls of the tunnel were smooth, almost polished, packed tight as if by enormous pressure. The smell that rose from it was overwhelming, the same smell Catherine had described in her transmissions, concentrated now to the point of physical nausea. Two members of the team attempted to descend with flashlights. They made it approximately 15 feet before the tunnel curved sharply downward and the walls began to narrow. The lead climber reported that the surface of the tunnel was warm to the touch and slightly damp, like skin. He reported seeing marks in the walls that looked like drag marks, parallel grooves running the length of the tunnel in both directions. He reported hearing something moving below him, deeper in the earth, a sound he described as breathing, but wrong. The team was ordered to withdraw. The excavation was never completed. Official records state that the tunnel was deemed unstable and not survivable for extended exploration. A geological survey was scheduled, but never conducted. The cabin was razed 3 weeks later, the foundation filled with concrete, the site marked as off-limits for future development. The area was redesignated as a wildlife corridor and removed from all public trail maps. Catherine Vance was declared missing and presumed dead on March 3, 2003. Her personnel file has since been redacted beyond recovery, with entire sections removed under exemptions that do not appear in standard Park Service protocol. Her family was informed that she died in a wilderness accident and that her remains were unrecoverable due to environmental conditions. They were not told about the transmissions. They were not told about the recording. They were not told about the hole beneath the cabin or the thing that had spoken with her mother's voice. The Cabin 9 file remains sealed. The wildlife research exemption under which it is classified does not correspond to any study conducted in the Olympic National Forest before or since. Rangers assigned to the surrounding area have reported, over the years, occasional anomalies, radio interference in the valley where the cabin once stood, the smell of decay in locations where no carcass can be found, the sense of being watched from below rather than above. One ranger, interviewed off the record in 2019, described hearing a woman's voice calling his name from somewhere beneath the forest floor during a routine patrol. He did not investigate. He filed no report. He transferred to a desk position the following month and has not returned to the backcountry since. The earth in the Olympic National Forest is old, and it runs deep. The bedrock beneath the rainforest is fractured by ancient geological activity, riddled with caves and fissures that have never been mapped, never been explored, never been understood. The forest keeps its secrets buried, and sometimes, in the deep winter, when the fog rolls through the valleys and the silence presses down like a physical weight, the forest gives those secrets a voice. It gives them a face. It gives them a name they should not know, spoken in tones they should not be able to produce. And it waits, patient and hungry, for someone to answer. Now we will begin our fifth story. The northern sector of Glacier National Park stretches across some of the most remote terrain in the continental United States. Here, The mountains rise like broken teeth against a sky that seems perpetually bruised, and the valleys between them hold shadows that do not move with the sun. In winter, temperatures plunge to 40 below, and the snow buries everything in a silence so complete that rangers have described it as deafening. The trails that wind through this region were carved by glaciers 10,000 years ago, and some say the land has never forgotten what it means to be frozen. It is a place where human presence feels like an intrusion, where the wilderness does not welcome visitors so much as tolerate them. And it is here, in the autumn of 2016, that an internal review of Glacier National Park's staffing records uncovered something that should not have been possible. The discrepancy was minor at first glance. A routine audit of personnel assignments flagged a single name attached to a duty station that no longer existed. The ranger in question had been filing weekly reports from a fire lookout in the park's most inaccessible northern quadrant for 11 consecutive months. His paperwork was meticulous, his observations detailed, his tone professional. He documented weather patterns, wildlife sightings, fire risk assessments, and the slow turning of seasons with the precision of a man who took his responsibilities seriously. There was only one problem. The station he claimed to occupy had been officially decommissioned in 1988. The structure had been condemned after a series of structural failures. Its radio equipment salvaged, its access trail allowed to disappear beneath decades of undergrowth. According to every official record, the building no longer stood. The ranger's name was David Emmerich. He had joined the Park Service 8 years earlier, transferring from a position in the Midwest with unremarkable evaluations and no disciplinary incidents. His colleagues described him as quiet, competent, and forgettable. He volunteered for remote postings, preferring solitude to the social dynamics of the larger ranger stations. When the assignment to the Northern Lookout appeared in the system, no one questioned it. Remote firewatch rotations were common enough, and the paperwork had been processed through standard channels. It was only when the auditors cross-referenced the station identifier with decommission records that the impossibility became clear. The decision was made to contact Emmerich directly. A radio call was placed to the frequency listed in his assignment file. The connection was poor, filled with static and long silences, but his voice came through clearly enough. He confirmed his location, his duties, and his well-being. He described the view from the tower in terms that matched historical photographs of the structure. He mentioned the cold, the isolation, the way the wind sounded, different at elevation. When asked about his supplies, he stated that he had everything he needed. When asked about visitors, he paused for a long moment before responding. He said that someone had been coming to the station every night since his arrival. The woman, he explained, always appeared after dark. He would hear her footsteps on the metal stairs that spiraled around the exterior of the tower, slow and deliberate, each step ringing softly against the frozen framework. She climbed at the same pace every night, never hurrying, never hesitating. By the time she reached the observation deck, he would already be standing at the window, watching. She wore a Park Service uniform, he said, but the style was wrong. The cut was older, the insignia unfamiliar. Her hair was pinned beneath a hat that had not been regulation for decades, and her face was incomplete. He used that word specifically. Incomplete. Not damaged, not obscured, not hidden. Incomplete. As though something essential had been removed or had never been there at all. He described the shape of her jaw, the outline of her cheekbones, the dark hollows where her eyes should have been. He said that when she turned toward the light, he could see through parts of her, as though her flesh were made of smoke that had not yet finished becoming solid. She would stand outside his door for hours, motionless, except for the slow movement of her breathing. Sometimes she would press her hand against the glass, her palm flat, her fingers spread. The glass never fogged. She never left prints. He stated that he had never opened the door. He stated that he had never seen her leave. The tone of his voice throughout the transmission was calm, measured, clinical. He described these encounters the way another ranger might describe tracking a bear or documenting erosion patterns. There was no fear in his words, no urgency, no plea for assistance. When the dispatcher asked if he wanted to be evacuated, he declined. He said his rotation was not yet complete. He said he had a responsibility to maintain the station. He said the woman had not yet done anything that warranted intervention. The investigation team assembled 3 days later. 4 rangers with wilderness experience, medical training, and the authorization to conduct a welfare check on a colleague who might be experiencing a psychological break. The coordinates in Emmerich's file led them to a trail that had not been maintained in nearly 30 years. They hiked for 2 days through terrain that fought them at every step, through deadfall and washouts and scree fields where a single misstep could send a person tumbling into oblivion. The weather held, but the temperature dropped steadily as they gained elevation. By the time they reached the ridge where the station should have stood, the cold had seeped into their bones in a way that felt permanent. What they found matched the decommission records exactly. The tower had collapsed years ago, perhaps decades. The observation cabin lay on its side at the base of the structure, its windows shattered, its walls buckled inward by the weight of accumulated snow and the slow pressure of neglect. The stairs that had once spiraled around the exterior now lay in rusted sections across the slope, half buried in vegetation. There was no radio antenna. There was no solar panel. There was no sign that anyone had occupied the site in living memory. The team searched the wreckage methodically. They found the remnants of equipment that had been state-of-the-art in the 1,970 seconds, now corroded beyond recognition. They found the skeletal framework of a cot, the shattered remains of a kerosene heater, the crumbled pages of logbooks that had turned to pulp in the moisture and cold, and in a space that had once been the main cabin, protected from the elements by a section of collapsed roofing, they found David Emmerich's personal effects. His backpack was there, packed with supplies that looked fresh. His sleeping bag was rolled neatly beside it. His water bottles were full. His flashlight still worked. And beside these items, placed with obvious care on a flat stone that served as a makeshift desk, was a journal. The entries began on the date of his reported arrival at the station. The handwriting was neat, the prose economical, the observations detailed. He documented the weather, the wildlife, the slow progression of autumn into winter. He described his daily routines with the precision of a man who found comfort in structure. And beginning with the 3rd entry, he documented the woman. She came at 9:47 p.m. on his first night. He heard her footsteps before he saw her, the soft ring of metal beneath boots that moved with no apparent hurry. He watched her climb. He watched her reach the deck. He watched her stand outside his door. He noted the time she arrived and the time she departed. He described her appearance in the same clinical tone he used for everything else. He made no attempt to explain her presence, offered no theories about her origin or intent. He simply recorded what he observed. The entries continued in this fashion for 11 months. The woman came every night without exception. Her behavior never varied. Her appearance never changed. She climbed. She stood. She pressed her hand against the glass. She waited. She left. Emmerich documented each visit with the same detached precision, noting minor variations in timing, in the angle of her head, in the position of her hands. He never wrote about fear. He never wrote about wanting to leave. He never wrote about what he thought she wanted. The final entry was dated 3 days before the investigation team's arrival. It described the woman climbing the stairs as she always did. It described her reaching the deck as she always did. It described her standing outside the door, her hand pressed flat against the glass, her incomplete face turned toward the light inside. And then, for the first time in 11 months, it described something different. She opened the door. Emmerich wrote that he did not move as she entered. He wrote that the air in the cabin changed, becoming colder and thicker, as though the atmosphere itself were being compressed. He wrote that she crossed the room slowly, her footsteps making no sound on the wooden floor. He wrote that she sat down across from him at the table where he took his meals, her movements deliberate, her posture formal. He wrote that she did not speak. He wrote that she reached across the table and placed both hands over his eyes. The journal entry ended mid-sentence. The pen had been set down carefully beside the page. There were no signs of struggle, no indication of distress, no evidence that anything violent had occurred. David Emmerich had simply stopped writing. His body was never found. The investigation team searched the surrounding area for 3 days. They found no tracks, no clothing, no biological evidence of any kind. They found no indication that Emmerich had left the site on foot or been removed by force. They found only his belongings, his journal, and the collapsed remains of a station that had not been operational in nearly 30 years. The radio transmissions he had been sending throughout his rotation were traced to their source frequency. The analysis revealed something that the investigators could not explain. The frequency Emmerich had been using had been decommissioned in 1971. The equipment capable of broadcasting on that frequency had been destroyed decades ago. The signals he had sent should not have been possible. The case was closed without resolution. The official report cited environmental factors, possible psychological deterioration, and the inherent dangers of remote wilderness postings. It made no mention of the woman. It made no mention of the journal entries. It made no mention of the radio frequency that should not have existed. David Emmerich's name was removed from all personnel databases. His service record was archived and sealed. His family was notified that he had died in the line of duty, though no body was recovered and no cause of death was determined. The northern sector of Glacier National Park was placed under restricted access for reasons that were never made public. Rangers who have worked the region since then speak of the area with reluctance. They describe a heaviness in the air near the old tower site, a pressure that builds behind the eyes and does not ease until they have descended to lower elevations. They describe sounds that do not match the known wildlife of the region, footsteps on metal where no metal exists, the soft creak of doors that rotted away decades ago. Some have reported seeing a figure on the ridge at dusk, standing motionless against the darkening sky, dressed in a uniform that belongs to no current era of the Park Service. None of them have approached. None of them have tried to make contact. The fire lookout at Glacier Station remains collapsed, its wreckage slowly being consumed by the forest that surrounds it. The trail that once led to its base has long since vanished, reclaimed by the wilderness that does not remember human paths. The radio frequency that carried David Emmerich's transmissions remains silent, its bandwidth unoccupied, its existence officially denied. But the staffing records for Glacier National Park's northern sector still show a single anomaly. A duty rotation that was never officially assigned. A station that was never officially reopened. A ranger whose name no longer appears in any database, but whose weekly reports continued to arrive for 11 months after his posting began. The reports stopped the same week the investigation team reached the site. No further transmissions have been recorded on the decommissioned frequency. No further sightings of the woman have been officially documented. But the rangers who work the northern sector say that on certain nights, when the cold drops below what the human body can comfortably endure and the wind carries sounds from places it should not reach, they can hear footsteps climbing stairs that no longer exist. Slow, deliberate, patient, and somewhere in the darkness above the tree line, a door that collapsed 30 years ago opens and closes without a sound. Now we will begin our last story. The Ozark Mountains have always kept their secrets buried deep, not in the soil, not in the rivers that carve through ancient limestone, but in the spaces beneath the hollow places where light has never reached and where time moves according to rules older than human memory. The caves that riddle these hills are not mere geological formations. They are wounds in the earth, passages into something that predates the forest above. The settlements that dot the valleys, the very concept of wilderness itself. What lives in those depths has no name in any language still spoken. But it knows us. It has always known us. And sometimes, when we descend into its domain uninvited, it decides to follow us back into the world of light. In late October of 2008, a 4-person geological survey team assembled at the edge of a restricted cave system deep in the Ozark backcountry. The restriction had been in place for over a decade, though the official reasoning had changed 3 times in that period: structural instability, endangered bat populations, ongoing federal research. None of these explanations satisfied the locals who had lived in these hills for generations. They knew better than to ask questions about certain places. They knew better than to go near them. The team consisted of 3 geologists from a state university and 1 graduate student completing fieldwork for her dissertation on Paleozoic limestone formations. They had secured permits through months of bureaucratic struggle, their proposal reviewed by no fewer than 7 different agencies before final approval. A national forest ranger named Thomas Bellamy was assigned to escort them. He had worked these mountains for 19 years. He had never entered this particular cave system. When he received the assignment, he requested a transfer. The request was denied. The morning of the survey was unseasonably warm, the kind of false autumn day that feels borrowed from a gentler season. The team gathered their equipment in the pre-dawn darkness: headlamps, sampling kits, climbing harnesses, communication devices that would prove useless within the first 100 meters of descent. Ranger Bellamy arrived last, his truck pulling into the clearing with its headlights off. He said nothing as he checked his own gear. When the lead geologist, a man named Harrison Webb, attempted to brief him on the survey parameters, Bellamy simply nodded and began walking toward the cave entrance. The team followed. The entrance was smaller than expected, a jagged mouth in a limestone outcropping that required them to enter single file. The air that breathed out from the opening carried a smell none of them could identify, not decay, not mineral dampness, but something older, something that reminded each of them of different childhood fears they had long forgotten. The graduate student, a woman named Elena Vasquez, noted in her field journal that she felt as though the cave was exhaling, as though they were entering something alive. The first 2 chambers presented nothing unusual. Standard limestone formations, evidence of ancient water flow, the expected darkness pressing against their headlamp beams. Ranger Bellamy moved ahead of the group, his movements careful and deliberate, his eyes scanning not the geological features but the shadows themselves. When Webb asked him what he was looking for, Bellamy did not answer. It was in the 3rd chamber that the survey began to unravel. The chamber was larger than their maps indicated, the ceiling disappearing into darkness beyond the reach of their lights. David Renner, the most experienced geologist on the team, was the first to notice the acoustic anomaly. Sounds were not behaving correctly. His footsteps seemed to arrive at his ears a moment after they should have, as though the echo was preceding the sound itself. He mentioned this to Webb, who dismissed it as a trick of the unusual chamber geometry. But Renner had spent 15 years in caves across 4 continents. He knew the difference between strange acoustics and something wrong. Elena Vasquez documented what happened next in fragmented notes that would later be found in her abandoned field journal. She wrote that Ranger Bellamy stopped walking and stood perfectly still for nearly a minute. When Webb approached to ask if something was wrong, Bellamy raised one hand without turning around. His voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. He said that someone was repeating his words, not echoing, repeating, saying them back to him before he finished speaking them. The team stood in silence, listening. At first there was nothing. Then, from somewhere deeper in the chamber, they heard it, Bellamy's voice, unmistakably his voice, speaking words he had not said. The voice was asking why they had come. The voice was telling them they should not have come. The voice was thanking them for coming. Renner suggested they turn back immediately. Webb argued that they had 6 hours of permitted survey time and had barely begun their work. The 4th team member, a younger geologist named Marcus Chen, said nothing at all. He was staring into the darkness beyond their lights with an expression that Elena would later describe as recognition, as though he was seeing something he had always known he would eventually see. They pressed deeper. The decision was Webb's, and he would never be able to explain why he made it. In the interviews that followed, he would say only that it felt necessary, that leaving would have been impossible, that the cave wanted them to continue. He did not know what he meant by this. The passage narrowed as they descended, the walls pressing closer, the ceiling dropping until they were forced to crouch, then crawl. Bellamy's breathing had become audible, ragged and quick, though he showed no outward signs of panic. At one point, Elena's headlamp flickered, and in that momentary dimness, she saw something that she would never fully describe in any official statement. She saw Bellamy ahead of her, crawling forward. She also saw Bellamy behind her, following. Both figures wore his uniform. Both figures moved with his exact mannerisms. She did not know which one was real. She chose to follow the one ahead and tried not to think about what was behind her. They emerged into a fourth chamber, this one smaller but impossibly deep. The floor dropped away into a vertical shaft that their lights could not penetrate. The air here was colder, carrying that same unidentifiable smell but concentrated now, thick enough to taste. Marcus Chen approached the edge of the shaft and stood there, looking down. When Webb called his name, Chen did not respond. When Elena touched his shoulder, he turned to look at her with eyes that seemed to be focused on something very far away, something none of them could see. It was then that David Renner began walking. He moved without hurry, without apparent purpose, toward a narrow passage on the far side of the chamber that none of them had noticed until that moment. His colleagues called to him. They shouted his name. Elena ran after him and grabbed his arm, but he pulled free with a strength that seemed beyond his physical capability. His face, when she saw it in her headlamp's beam, was peaceful, serene. He was smiling. Renner walked into the passage and did not stop. The team followed, all except Bellamy, who remained at the edge of the shaft, staring down into the darkness. They pursued Renner through a twisting corridor that seemed to descend endlessly, the walls growing slick with moisture that did not feel like water. They could hear Renner's footsteps ahead of them, steady and calm. And they could hear something else, a sound like breathing, like the entire cave system inhaling and exhaling around them. When they finally caught sight of him, he had stopped. He was standing in a small natural alcove, facing away from them. But he was not alone. There was a figure standing in front of him. It wore the shape of a man, but it was not a man. Its proportions were wrong in ways that the human eye struggled to process, limbs slightly too long, joints bending at angles that seemed to bypass anatomy entirely. Its face, visible in the edge of Elena's headlamp beam, was David Renner's face. Every detail perfect, every feature identical, except the eyes, which were not eyes at all but openings, windows into something that contained no light, no reflection, no bottom. Renner reached out and touched the figure's face. His hand did not stop at the surface but continued through, sinking into whatever substance composed this thing. And as it did, Renner's body began to change. Elena would later describe it as watching someone step into their own reflection and find that the reflection was deeper than the room it mirrored. Renner walked into the figure, merged with it, and then both were gone. The alcove was empty. The passage was silent. The cave continued breathing around them. The team's return to the surface exists in their memories as fragments, inconsistent and contradictory. Webb would insist they emerged within an hour of Renner's disappearance. Elena would claim days had passed underground. Marcus Chen, in his only statement before he stopped speaking entirely, said they had never entered the cave at all, that the whole survey had been a dream he was still having. Ranger Bellamy's account was the most detailed and the most disturbing. He reported that during their ascent, he had seen himself standing in the darkness at every turn. Not reflections, there were no reflective surfaces in the cave, but himself, watching. Multiple versions, dozens perhaps, all wearing his face, all standing motionless, all waiting. He reported that when he finally emerged into the October sunlight, he looked back and saw one more figure at the cave entrance. It was him. It smiled at him with his own face. Then it walked out of the cave and into the forest, moving in the direction of his home. The cave was sealed within 48 hours under orders that originated from an agency that refused to identify itself. The surviving team members were debriefed separately, their accounts recorded, classified, and filed in archives that have never been made public. Marcus Chen died 17 months later. The cause was listed as organ failure, though the autopsy revealed no disease, no toxins, no explanation for why a healthy 32-year-old man's organs had simply stopped functioning simultaneously. His family reported that in his final weeks, he had begun speaking to someone who was not there, someone he called by his own name. Harrison Webb took his own life 6 months before Chen's death. His note, 3 words long, was never released to the media. Those who read it refused to discuss its contents. Elena Vasquez left the country and has not returned. Her current whereabouts are unknown. Ranger Thomas Bellamy resigned from the Forest Service 3 months after the survey. In his final interview, conducted by an investigator whose name has been redacted from all records, he stated that something had walked out of the cave with them. He could not say what it was. He only knew that it was wearing his face and that he saw it every day, standing just behind his reflection in every mirror, every window, every surface that could hold an image. It never moved. It never spoke. It simply watched him with eyes that were not eyes, waiting for something he could not understand. Bellamy moved to a small house in another state, a house he had chosen specifically because it contained no mirrors. He covered the windows with heavy curtains. He removed the glass from picture frames. He drained the bathtub immediately after each use. For 6 months, he lived in a world without reflections. And for 6 months, the thing that wore his face did not appear. He was found by a mail carrier who noticed packages accumulating on his porch. The bathroom door was locked from the inside. Every reflective surface in the residence had been shattered, the small mirror he had forgotten behind the medicine cabinet, the chrome fixtures, the glass of his watch, the surface of the water in the toilet bowl. His face in death wore an expression that the coroner could not categorize, something between recognition and surrender. The cause of death was listed as cardiac arrest. The investigation was closed within a week. The cave remains sealed. The warning signs have weathered and faded. The locals still avoid the area, though fewer each year remember why. And sometimes, in houses scattered across 3 states, in homes where the surviving families of the survey team once lived, mirrors are found shattered in the morning. No one admits to breaking them. No one can explain the figure that appeared in their surfaces the night before, standing just behind the viewer's shoulder, wearing a face that seemed almost familiar, almost right, waiting with patient, empty eyes for the moment when recognition finally comes. Some doors, once opened, can never be fully closed. Some things, once seen, can never be unseen. And some reflections, once they learn the shape of your face, will wear it forever, standing in every mirror, every window, every still pool of water, waiting for the day when you finally look long enough to let them through.